So my name's Jonathan Sauer. I farm here at Red Willow along with my father Mike, my brother-in-law Rick, and my brother Daniel. So we're out here most every day tromping around and doing what needs to be done. We're not a huge vineyard. It sound big, but we're about 140 acres of producing wine grapes. We grow other crops. We have some Concords and hay as well. That's pretty typical of a lot of vineyards throughout the valley. You'll see a diversity of other crops grown as well. We're a high elevation vineyard, so the bottom of the vineyard would be about 1,100 feet, going all the way up to 1,300 feet. So I think where we're standing, we'd be 12.5 or something like that. And which really makes for pretty unique soils, because the lower areas you'd have impacted by Lake Missoula floods, and these higher elevation vineyards, you're going back ancient soils, going back millions of years old, and a lot of diversity, which is pretty typical to our valley, but just not only the crops that are grown, but in the soils and varieties that we grow. That's one thing. We grow about 16 different varietals, mostly reds. And Red Willow is started in the early 70s by my father, and has just developed slowly since. And we're known as a pioneering vineyard, introduced a lot of new varieties into the state. I mean, definitely Syrah and just things like Viognier or Tempranillo or Malbec or Nebbiolo, just a lot of different varieties. And we're very remote, isolated. This is the very western end of the Yakima Valley AVA. So I would often say, he goes from Red Willow all the way down to Red Mountain, but I think now I have to add Candy Mountain. They're even further. So it's a huge appellation. So the story of my father, it's more of an interesting one. He had started planting some Concords in the early 70s, and he was in the National Guard at the time, and he said he was in the back of one of the Army trucks, sitting there talking to some friends, and one of them said, "Hey, Mike, I got a problem. I got a whole bunch of Cabernet Sauvignon cuttings that somebody backed out on, and would you be interested in it? I know you're learning about grapes." And Dad agreed, said, "Sure, I got a great spot for it." And so Dad took the cuttings and planted 3 acres of cab. And that was in 1973, and that's pretty much the start of Red Willow Vineyard. That was really early on. So wineries, there was only about 6 wineries in the state, and so where are we, 1,000 today? So we've seen a lot of changes. Today, we're always trying to just build the soil. Back right behind me, we got some compost that we put on, and so we're just trying to keep the health. These vines have been in a lot of cases for many years, and we're trying to keep the nutrition up and the vines healthy. Some of the things we're doing today is clones we're in the vineyard. We're doing some pruning. So we usually start with our Concords. They're really hardy, and we'll hold off on the wine grapes until February, and then we'll start on our Riesling and Gewurz and some of the hardier ones, and work our way up to the Syrah and Cabs. So last week we were making some cuttings for future plantings. I don't know, winter's kind of a time of a little bit reflection, of looking back, but also thinking ahead. So it's things are always changing in the vineyard. I love the seasons. It's each season has its own beauty, uniqueness, and that's one thing, like in the Eastern Washington especially, has just the 4 distinct seasons. And I like that Yakima, our winters aren't too long typically, and gets enough snow, and and it's just always changing. And so the vintage really begins in the winter time, and we have just such an amazing climate to grow just consistently quality wine grapes year after year. You know, our first really 30 years were this collaboration of Dad and a master wine named David Lake, and David brought in these the concept of vineyard designating and recognizing Red Willow, and they had a great friendship, and they worked a lot of years as Dad was developing the vineyard. Dad had the passion and the drive, willingness to take chances and try new varieties and experiment, but there was also David Lake would help guide that. So trying to match the variety with the site is kind of a challenge, and I think Dad and David did a great job. It's just so many things that make this a unique vineyard.